Sorry, these trials we didn't actually end up doing in the hat. Obviously we knew there was a little bit of drought going on, and we put these silage trials in Lethbridge under our irrigation this year. We have a forage trial as well that we're looking at doing out here, and just because of the drought in the springtime, we knew we had a couple years of drought. We ended up moving that to Lethbridge as well, but we did reseed it in the fall, so hopefully we'll be able to give you some data on that in the coming years. So today I'm going to be presenting on the RST. I got rid of the LNE because I figured you guys would figure this one out too easy if I gave you all the letters. So anybody who doesn't know me, I'm the research coordinator at Farming Smarter, and one of the things I'm looking after is, so I wanted to start with a big thanks to the Alberta Seed Guide. This is where all this information is going to, and so you know, between Alberta Agriculture and Forestry, the AOF, and CDC North, they do a lot of work putting all the seed together. ANL Labs did all the testing for these forages, or sorry, for the silage. And then a whole bunch of seed collaborators and seed farmers in southern, actually across Alberta, got together to put all this seed together for us. So it's really, I just want to make sure to thank all those people, as well as all the other associations who worked on this. There's been between 10 and 11 associations across the province putting all these trials together. And also a big thank you to the Farming Smarter crew, because without them, we couldn't put these trials on. So what are the regional silage trials? These are just small plot, randomized, complete block trials. And what we're looking at is nutritional data for silage, for cattle mostly, cereals and pulses. And this is really interesting and exciting for Farming Smarter because it's not an area we typically think about. Most of what we do is grain production. And, you know, we got excited about things like hemp because of the CBD and other opportunities. And so this is just kind of another branch of that. And so we're pretty excited to be working with silage and into some forages and different things like that. So we're talking about cattle, and one easy way to maybe kind of wrap your head around it if you're not familiar with silage and feed is just kind of thinking of it as like a nutritional label, like a nutritionism kind of breakdown of how to feed animals. So one big component is crude protein. You've got the calcium, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, and then total digestible nutrients, which is kind of a combination and calculation of all sorts of different things to give you kind of the bulk makeup of your cattle nutrition, or what your feed nutrition. So these trials have been going on since 2008 at 10 to 11 sites, and this is just a map showing how they're broken up through the region. So if you're not from kind of the southern Alberta or Region 1 area, you can see when I show you the graphs later, kind of pay attention, remember what your number is, because that's going to be your local data for this site. So for example, if you came all the way from Red Deer today, you'd be in Region 4 when you're looking at that data. The data I'm going to show is Region 1. And not all that data made it onto the charts that I had because this is our first year doing it. So all of our stuff's in the pool and in the provincial averages, but I added all ours in a separate column that you'll see later. And also a special thanks to Alex for the regional coordinator for all these trials. So these are set up pretty much the same way we do the rest of our cropping research. We use 6 rows with our normal air drill. We've got pillar laser discs on that opener, or on that seeder, 9.5-inch spacing. We made sure to try and find some canola stubble to seed them into. And then when we did the fertilizer blends, they're looking at about 25 kgs per hectare of that old school P205 formulation. We used 1152, and then we were trying to fertilize about 50% of our recommended N. So we did some soil samples. We didn't want to overwhelm them, have too much lodging or anything like that, but also depending on the year, we want to make sure that we're not cutting back too much. And we didn't want to have any potential issues with the nitrates building up in the feed later on. So we seeded all the cereals, the barley, oats, and triticale at 250 seeds per meter squared. And then there's a pea cereal blend, and so we did 75, 125 seeds per meter squared for that. So this is all stuff that was new to me, so I figured I'd do a quick little lesson on all these kind of basics of silage and what goes into the nutritional kind of label, so to speak, for these things. So crude protein is a really important thing that's going to show up on the results, and crude protein is really it's a calculation. It's determining the chemical analysis of N, which is a basic building block of all the amino acids. And so this is important. This is what goes into all that food. So CP is just a calculation. It's 6.25 times the N, and that's just how they do the chemical analysis. And what it's for is it's just sustaining digestion in that cow. So you've got all the fancy stomach stuff they have going on. It's really important. If you get too low, you slow down digestion, and then you have other problems. So that's where the protein comes in. ADF and NDF aren't really reported in the results, but they're just two measures of different things in that silage. So the ADF is the acid detergent fiber, and that's looking at like the things, the cellulose and lignin that aren't going to be digestible and are going to have to pass through. So you obviously don't want too much of that in your silage. And NDF is a neutral detergent fiber, and that's just kind of like another filler. So getting into phosphorus, so we the agronomists in the room know a lot about phosphorus for the plants, but specifically when it comes to feed, this is critical in root growth. But this brings me all the way back to university stuff. I thought I'd never see this chart again. Metabolic or cellular respiration and glycolysis in the cell and things like that. And if you look close, basically you'll see that ATP is adenosine triphosphate. I can't forget that. And every single step there has basically phosphorus as one of the main building blocks. And that's how energy is cycled throughout the cell. And that's what gives all of us and all kind of, I don't want to say all living organisms, but a lot of us who have this pathway in our bodies, that's how we get our energy. So phosphorus is critical to that. Nitrates, this is reported in the ppm or ion levels, and this is heavily dependent on environmental conditions. We all know that. And so this is, when you're looking at silage, you want to be careful if there's stress, if there's drought, if there's anything like that. You can actually have toxic levels build up. And so you have to be careful if you're giving a high nitrates in the feed. You have to be careful to cut it and ration it. And a lot of the work that goes into the silage feed type thing is all about getting the right rations and stepping up at the right timings and days after milk for dairy cows and things like that. So it does get quite complicated in that way. And then TDN is total digestible nutrients, and this is another calculation. There's kind of an old way of doing it. Trying to remember, it's using the ADF in the old way, and then there's a newer way that takes into account a whole bunch of different things. And this is kind of like your calorie count. Like this is like how good is it going to be? So there's a couple different ways for harvesting this. This is our first year doing it, so we managed to kind of beg and borrow that big green machine there. In the top left and bottom right, and so that's a ride-on forage harvester, and it just cuts a crop right down at the ground level, and then it's got a scale built on, so we get a full plot weight. There's like, if you can believe it, like 30 kgs or so in every one of those small plots that we have. And then the old school method would be to do one of those, I hope it's self-propelled silage choppers that Diane sent me a picture there from Kara. And so they'll go and do that and then take tubs and weigh all those tubs. And then we'll pick through everything. A lot of the guys who do this quite a bit like to actually leave whole plants instead of chopping it up too much. And then that way you can pull out individual plants and you've got a really representative sample if you grab from different spots in the plot. And so all those subsamples are then taken. We'll get a wet weight and a dry weight and get a moisture, and then those are taken in for the forage analysis as well. So this is just showing you some of our barley trials. I wish I had put the variety names because these were probably the most beautiful plots we had for the entire year. We seeded them right around May 7th, and then obviously under irrigation, they looked beautiful. But a little bit of differences in some of the varieties. Like I said, these seeds came from all over the place, so it's really neat to see some of those different varieties. This shot was taken right before we went to harvest them, so there's you can see some of the lodging. We took some lodging data. It's usually pretty challenging to get plots to lodge in small plots, but pretty impressed. You can see the middle plot there stood relatively well, and then on the right you can see the one standing beside it. It's all laying down, so hopefully there's some good data there. So I'm going to get into it. This is basically this is our results table. It's probably harder to see than I was expecting it to be, so hopefully I can read it out to you a little bit better. But this is what's going to happen if you go onto Alberta Seed Guide, seed.ab.ca, and you look up these trials. This is what it's going to come up with. So you've got your area, region 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, kind of in that central part there. And then there's a yield category. So there's low, medium, and high yield categories. And so that's broken up based on the tons per acre. So if you expect it to be, if you're in a low yielding area, you can kind of look at those values a little bit differently. And then there's a whole section with that nutritional value. And so what they do for these is, just like I think they do for some of the other seed, is they look at kind of an industry standard. So for barley, it's Austenson, CDC Austenson. And we're at 10.6 tons per acre for Austenson. I think I got some here. So I added in our Region 1 data, and then I've got those didn't show up individually. I've got a few different things that I just kind of wanted to bring to light. So the first is, if you look through all those yield categories, everything's compared to that check. You got a lot in the mid-90s, some just above 100. Really, there's not a whole lot of variability. There's nothing that's coming out, I don't think, is like, oh, here's a clear winner, here's a clear loser. Excuse me. In some of the low yielding categories, the Advantage, the Eldorado, and the Bow all came out a little bit better than the check, like 106, 105%. And then on the high section, the Claymore and the TR were a lot higher. But I think what was really interesting here, more than necessarily trying to compare the specifics and the yields, was just that if you look in that nutritional section there, the big circle I've got on the right-hand side, almost everything there is above 100. So regardless of whether or not something has that yield increase, it more than likely has a nutritional increase, a benefit, kind of like taking something, adding all those extra vitamins in. So probably, even if you're looking at a similar yield, you might have even improved nutrition. So that's just something to pay attention to in barley. And it does show up in a few other things. I'm trying to figure out what this one is now. This is our oats. So this is just kind of pre-heading and then harvest timing picture as well. So oats are an interesting story. We've grown oats. We've tried to grow them out here, did some variety trials for Quaker oats for a couple of years, and I'm not sure if there's many oat growers in the area. Quaker decided that there probably wasn't enough to continue on those trials, and then so we had them in Lethbridge for a few years after that, but I think they've kind of discontinued some of their North American program. Excuse me. But we still do the silage trials on them. You can see Baylor is the industry checked for the oats, and there's quite a few that did pretty well. Juniper and Nasser were both two that were 111 and 108% of the check in Lethbridge. But just with a grain of salt, that I think that some of this data wasn't public. We just had one site year for our region for this data. Some of the other groups, I forgot to mention the overall station data. So some of these other groups and some of these other varieties have had, say, 40, 50 site years worth of data over the last couple years. So they're quite confident in the numbers there. And then just to kind of key in, I noticed that, when it came to this, what did I notice? I've lost it. I don't remember what I was going to mention there. Then we've got our Triticale, so wheat and Triticale trial, and there's really wide range of different varieties in here. You've got like on lists, different leaf sizes and things like that. So really different, unique looks to all of these. We did get some really drastic yield increases. So if you look at the region 1, I didn't highlight it, the region 1 section there, the Awesome 124%, Delight 127%, Andrew 121. Every single one of our wheat and triticales actually did better than our check. So in our case down in the south, we saw that there was a lot of yield tonnage on some of those new varieties. And then I guess I kind of already summarized it, but in the high yielding category, we saw a lot of those other varieties did really well. And then looking back at the nutritional data, kind of same story as the barley, lots and lots of 3-digit numbers there, meaning that lots of improvements over the check. And then lastly, the pulse mixtures. So, didn't want to stick completely to cereals, and so they've been doing this kind of integrated cereal plus pulse. And so we used the checks from each of the previous cereal trials, so the Austensin, the Bow, and the Taza, and then integrated the Meadow and the Jasper P with each of those to see what can happen. And this is where things get, really kind of wacky. So in terms of, just straight tonnage, wasn't a lot different. There was a couple low numbers there. That one Baylor Meadow was only 79%, so I'm not sure what's going on. We're going to have to do a little more testing to see what's happening there. And then in the kind of this medium category, saw lots and lots in that 110 to 115% range. But something I didn't expect to see is if you look at the nutritional data, so there's some sort of synergy going on here. There's not a pulse on its own, so I can't say, but obviously compared to, say, Austensin on its own, having these pulse mixtures, just kind of like the intercropping story and other things like that, some of these are really changing the dynamics of what's happening. So, you've got 100, and, for example, calcium, and the Baylor Jasper is 173% of the Austensin alone, or things like that. So there's probably a good news story there. I'm going to have to talk to some silage experts and find out what's going on there, because I'm curious now. If any of you know, let me know. So that's it. If you have any questions on this, please hesitate to contact me. It's my first time growing it. Really, the experts that I talked to for a lot of this were Alyssa Crone out of Lara. They've been doing this a long time. And Alex Fedko, the coordinator for the trials. So thanks a lot. Sure. Lewis says I can field questions. Yeah. Well, I talked to Alex about that, and he said it all got pooled in with the rest of it, and I think part of it is just because it was our first time growing it, and so we wanted to have confidence it was the right spot. So I can follow up and find out. Yeah.
Is it possible to get those slides for you, or
Sure. Yeah. Because if you're interested in what that says, yeah, for sure.
Mike, was there anything difference in the triticales, like visually, are those triticales longer maturing, or are they to get that big yield boost over the check?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I was looking through, and there's obviously a lot of variability within the wheat and triticale trial, but specifically the reasoning why I couldn't tell you. I know like our yields were high and conditions were optimal. Why it'd be so much better than the check necessarily, I'm not sure. So I'd kind of like to compare that to maybe some of the other trials where I know we maybe had that variety in there, or if we have some other plots we combine and see what it looks like. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I didn't mention. I guess we're kind of in between funding on this. So we had some. I think we were looking at applying a few different things. There's not a specific thing funding us, from what I understand right now, but we are hoping to continue to do this. And so it was our first year last year, but moving forward, we plan to keep doing this. I'm not sure. I don't know if Ken maybe knows about that. Would we have any winter cereals added into this? So we're kind of just jumping on the ship of something that's already been going on, really. So we used to do, you know, the pulse regional variety trials and some other things like that, and then we kind of decided we wanted to focus on some of our own research for a while, and then, you know, stuff kind of falls back in your lap sometimes. So, sorry, do you think we're going to do any winter stuff?
But yeah, I don't even think these trials are actually funded, so everything's changing in this world right now, not just for
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. I'm going to sneak away.